Hi guys, it's Sarah Jane from Access Your True Nature, where I support and facilitate people to resolve trauma that's deeply buried within their psyche and their bodies, so that they can live happy, fulfilled lives. And I wanted to come to you today quickly before my family get home. I've just come back from a market, the Josie Market, where I was talking about my upcoming tele-series on shadow work. And it reminded me of a quote by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who says that no matter where we are, the shadows that trots behind us are definitely four-footed. And I wanted to speak a little bit about that today, and also the work of Peter Levine. Hi, Kate. Who is one of my greatest mentors in how to heal trauma from an animalistic point of view, that in the societies that we grow up in and the way that we are programmed to respond in life from our early childhood is deeply wrapped up in unexpressed and unresolved trauma, which often shows up as disease or sickness or exhaustion later on in life. And what it means to be able to actually go into the shadows and heal those parts of us that no matter what we've tried, we still keep getting into the same old pattern repeat of doing the same thing over and over again. And why I love to look to nature and to animals and horses, which have such huge hearts and really know how to endure. And my favorite saying that instead of asking for an easier or lighter load, you ask for a stronger back. Hi, Debbie BB. Good morning. Yeah. So what does it mean to wake the tiger? And how can you use that analogy of activating that reptilian part of your triune brain to engage in having a fully somatic experience to bring your nervous system down? Because remember, the trauma isn't held in the event. It's actually held in your nervous system, because it's not appropriate a lot of the times to express anger. We're programmed out of having a full range of expression of our feelings, right? Of what our body's actually feeling in the moment. And when we don't express in a healthy way, we disassociate and we start to come down in a way where we're just constantly on and constantly hypervigilant. And I was having a conversation with a woman at the market today about how we're not allowing ourselves to cry when the tears come up, and we apologize for crying. And that's part of the programming. Remember, none of this is your fault, and there's nothing really that needs fixing. It's really just about allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to respond, and not having to know necessarily why you're crying. Think of it like a pressure cooker, where over the years we are programmed out of being angry when we're angry and not being able to speak or not feeling heard. And most of the time this comes from not feeling safe from our primary caregivers. And I talk a lot more about that in the adverse childhood experiences, where we're forming all these neural nets, all these clusters, where everything based on the response that we're getting from our environment shapes and forms us into living outside of our true nature, in a space of dissociation where we're desensitized. And I see this a lot. And I was looking at that at this market today, where one woman said, yeah, people are pretty lazy. They're expecting me to bring the crowds. And I was like, is it laziness, or is it this learned helplessness that we have developed from living in ancestral trauma, from living in cultural trauma, and living in countries that are being ripped apart by this sense of not feeling safe to show up, not feeling safe to express ourselves and toot our horn, so to speak, of why they're doing what they're doing. And it got me back to thinking about this place where we misidentify what trauma really is. And Peter Levine talks about this in his book, where we need to look at waking up our fight-flight or fight-flee survival impulses, our energy that's tied up in this pressure cooker, And he talks about how he was working with a woman who had a tonsillectomy when she was like 5 years old. And she was literally pinned down and had ether put on her with a mask. And think about it like this: when you've had your nurturers take care of you and keep you out of harm, and then you go into hospital and you're not aware of what's going on and you can't fight or flee. And first of all, that's really frightening for a little person, because you don't know what's going on, and your biology senses threat, but it can't fight, it can't get away, because in her case there's this overpowering position, in this case doctors and nurses, that are pinning her down, and then she passes out. So of course she went under the anesthetic because she had ether, which put her under. And what happens is that when that person comes out, in our world, right, in our world of medicine, we tend to not allow the person to discharge that running away action and release stress. We call it, deactivation of the stress response. And if you've ever watched this, you see animals in nature shake it off when they get away. But this woman goes on, and later on in life, she had a lot of medical conditions that were showing up as pain, as leaky gut, as all sorts of anxiety. So he in his session with this woman, he initiated her stored and frozen, I'll say that again, he initiated her stored and frozen fight, flight, flee energy that was trapped in her body from that trauma at 5, by giving her an image of a tiger. And of course, if we were to encounter a lion or a tiger or a bear, one of our impulses would be to run away or to stay and fight. And that's what he wanted to bring up in her, was this knowing in her body's intelligence that she could flee, she could run away from that threat, from that danger. Because you see, most of our stresses that lead us into some kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome, whatever you want to call it, it's a spectrum. And it all really comes down to feeling helpless, feeling under threat, and not being able to defend ourselves, and not being able to protect ourselves, and certainly not being able to find safety. So that, in a sense, is what waking the tiger means. And Waking the Tiger, if you haven't, I highly recommend this book by Peter Levine. And he goes into explaining in a really easy, succinct way to explain that every single human being and mammal and reptile, we have a capacity, we have a fight-flight nervous system. It's the parasympathetic nervous system that plays, and it's just as important as the other nervous systems that make us up to be human or mammalian. And it often gets shut down, right? So this is really about looking at how can you wake up the tiger. It's not about hurting anybody. It's not about being a tiger and attacking, but it's really about getting that survival energy going again, so that your body processes aren't stuck in this freeze response that later shows up as disease or pain. And this is a long conversation, but I really wanted to just start to encourage you to look at all the places where you are so tightly wrapped up in this hypervigilant state, where perhaps you look numbed out, or perhaps you look like you are lazy, and it's not that at all, right? Remember, none of this is your fault. It's just the bad programming of this reality, and we haven't really been given these tools as children to learn how to be in the world in a place where we are very dependent on our primary caregivers to create a sense of safety for us. And what happens is that when our parents aren't safe, and if you haven't done it, I suggest you take the ACE test. You can find it on my website, accessyourtruenature.com, and see how high your ACEs are. Because remember, trauma isn't in the event, it's held in your nervous system. And what happens, and I'm speaking more not of the big ones that Kaiser Permanente speak about in the ACE test, but I'm speaking more about the chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress that perhaps you couldn't get away. You couldn't create safety for yourself as a child, or maybe your parents just were emotionally not there. And this can show up in many, many ways. It's the lack of touch. It's the lack of interaction. It's the lack of being seen. And it's all the ways that we start to shut down. Remember, when we come in, there's two parts of the vagus nerve, and that ventral vagal tone, so how strong you are in trusting yourself, your gut intuitive process of knowing that this doesn't feel good for you, we have to borrow that from our primary caregivers as we're developing our own. So if you have a mother, for example, that has had Botox and you can't see when she's cross because it's totally frozen over the forehead, but the energy of the words doesn't match the expression on the face, we start to get very confused and distorted in what is safe and what isn't safe for us. And we then have to adapt our way of showing up and responding to our world in a totally different way. And then later on, we kind of don't know who we are. We've lost our sense of identity because we've always been in response to other people's reactions and where they're stuck on, freeze, or disassociated from their true feelings and their emotions. So we want to look at this from a place of that it's all happening in your nervous system. And how can you come down? How can you come down just as nature does? This is why zebras, animals in the wild, don't get ulcers, because their nervous response, their nervous system response off of the reptilian brain is fight, flight, or flee. So if you've ever watched a National Geographic film where you see a cheetah chasing an impala and the impala gets pinned down, and you sort of see that beautiful trigger system that nature so kindly put in there, there is always already a disassociation from the body, so the animal doesn't feel pain, but you can sort of see the energy going out of their body. And then along comes Mr. Hyena and acts as this pattern interrupt to try and take the prey away from the cheetah. And in that moment where you think the life is gone out of the impala, he jumps up, right? That's that sloppy part of the vagus nerve that goes into threat. You see this with pigeons when there's a hawk flying around, or you put a chicken on its back, it just kind of goes completely numb. And that's that freeze state. That's built into us, right? It's in our subconscious patterning. We don't have to think about it. The nervous system takes over to protect us. And this works really, really well in nature for a lot of animals, where pretending to be dead, the animal that perhaps would be wanting it for dinner wouldn't necessarily go and get that, because innately they know that the meat might be off, that it could be full of germs and stuff. So it's not in their wide view of being interesting. So there's a part of our nervous system that's there to keep us alive. It's there to keep us healthy and thriving. And our bodies are so innately intelligent. They know how to do that. But because we have this prefrontal thinking part of our brain, we don't do the full spectrum of the nervous system, high and the come down, very well. Because we're thinking about, well, should I run or should I stay and fight? Or do I go into freeze state? And this is where we get a little bit confused as to what is my true nature. What is the thing that's going to keep me alive and keep me in a healthy place? And this goes for relationships in our lives too, where we often see this with people that have chosen to see love or safety as the abuser. We see this in learned helplessness, where we keep repeating the same thing over and over again, and our body does this very, very well as well, of repeating the pattern, right? So you see this in rape victims, where the learned helplessness when they couldn't run away, and all the talk therapy in the world, and all the reasons and justifications that are layered on top of the trauma, don't really get down to the root cause of where am I holding this in my body? Where is it showing up as pain? We're band-aiding the symptoms. And we think that because we've cognitively processed this, right, and come to some kind of peace with it, that we should be able to get on with our lives. And we don't, because we haven't allowed the body to complete the running away or the fighting response that is what nature intended our nervous systems to do for us. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this. And if you've done the ACE test and you see that your ACEs are high, how do you get to show up in a healthy way in your life? How do you get to actually trust your gut knowing? And I would say, just for today, in keeping it short, because I could talk about this for forever, and those of you that know me do, and I'll probably do another layer of this later on, because I didn't do a video yesterday, and I wanted to talk about the swan and the scorpion story again, which is, it kind of flows into what I'm talking about here as to unresolved trauma and how to release it. But I think that the most important thing to do is to actually start to look at your triggers, to start to see, where am I still stuck in shock and trauma that's showing up in self-sabotaging behavior, that's showing up in procrastination or binge eating or drinking too much or trying to numb yourself down, as if that will change it, and start to look at the stories. And that's what I'm inviting you into if you haven't already joined us. The shadow dancing class starts on the 8th. And if you haven't really explored this way of looking at trauma, that it's a really good place to enter into, where we can start to identify what the feelings are and where you're holding it in your body underneath the story. Right? Because it's never in the story, it's never in the event, it's in the body. And as Gabor Mate says, this is where the body never lies, right? We think we've moved on, we think we've got over it, we think we're giving ourselves permission to express ourselves in a healthy way, but we're still holding back for fear of being rejected by the tribe, by being cast out, by being judged or vilified or made wrong, which in the old way would mean instant death, right? If you were cast out of the tribe, that would not be a very safe place for you. So this is how we start to show up, and we're always trying to tread on eggshells around certain people, and we're always trying to see what's going to happen and how you can control your environment, as if that will make you safe. And yet we still go through life looking for safety and never finding it. So we want to look at the trauma that's not in the event, it's in the nervous system, and how the stories that we're telling ourselves based on our subconscious, based on all these years of building on the initial trauma, right? All the neural nets, all the clusters of where we start to attract similar themes to the story, can start to dissolve and transmute and become something greater that actually allows you to stand and be courageous and allow your body to shake it off. And the other one is to really establish safety in that, because let's face it, the world doesn't look that safe right now. There are some very real threats, and this isn't about pretending that we live in the utopian ideal world where everybody loves thy neighbor and everybody cares about you. It's really about going into that radical self-care of knowing that the way that you see yourself, the way that you're telling things to yourself, are the very reason for your suffering, right? The suffering is always in the story. It's not in the event. And this is part of the human condition that I'm certainly on a mission to change. So it's about how can you create a different way of being in the environment that's safe for you. And that really is where we have to start looking at our bodies as our greatest consciousness facilitators. It's about being able to say, where am I feeling unsafe or unsure in my body? And having a conversation with that part. And I'm going to go through this in sessions as we work within the group, to really start to look at how we can create boundaries, that because we all need boundaries in order to feel safe, but to know that we create safety beyond the perception and the illusion of the story, right? What's in the past is affecting your future. This is how our biology becomes our biography, or our biography becomes our biology. Our stories are what create disease and sickness and a sense of feeling separate or alone, or that you have to figure all of this out on your own. And then the next layer is to start to look at the physiology. So this is about educating yourself as to how the body works, how your nervous system works. And I go into this in great depth in the Out of the Blues program, where we really look at the biology, right, of the physiological responses that are natural to the body, and that all emotions are there to assist us when they're being expressed healthy to show up in our true nature. So we want to look at the kidney and the adrenal relationship. The consciousness of the kidneys is existential fear. It's about the big fears, not the perceived threats, but what's really going on here that is threatening my survival. And we've just swapped out the jungle where we used to be chased by saber-toothed tigers, and we had to huddle together at night in the cave because community, more eyes, kept us safe and alive. But the imminent threat was that we could be eaten. We could be somebody else's dinner, and that part is still running. It's still running our lives in the concrete jungle, right? We've just swapped our threats out for a lot of perceptions about fear of the future, fear of not having enough, fear of not being able to show up and be who you were. Adapting to your environment is healthy. It's how cockroaches have stayed alive for this long, and tortoises and the crocodiles, right? They've learned to adapt to their environment, but they haven't given themselves up. They're responding to the animalistic part, the anima animus, the microcosm of the macrocosm of that we're all connected to everything else. So the morphogenetic field of fear is a way that we have to respond and really look at our stories as to see, where is my body making this right? Because your body will always follow your mind. And that's really where we start to change trauma into something that can really have a positive impact to keep you healthy as an organism, but also to keep the organism of the collective, of humanity, of the planet in balance, that is constantly shifting and moving and adapting in a healthy, positive way that's bigger than just us. So we want to look at the kidneys and the adrenals, and we want to look at the nervous system, and we want to look at where have we pruned back, right? Remember, at 18, the brain does a huge cutback on all the neurons and the dendrites that aren't being used. And if we've been pruned based on adverse childhood experience and chronic unpredictable stress, right, the daily stresses of maybe being shamed or bullied or demeaned or neglected in your home or in your schooling environment, there's not much left to prune. So this is where we're seeing it showing up, and science is really proving now that that's your Alzheimer's, it's your dementia, it's the brain fog, it's the confusion where we're kind of so numbed out that we're not connecting to our environment, we're not creating our lives. And I see Kate Emerson here. She's the queen of clutter, or clearing out your clutter. And this is where we see these habits habituated into physical hoarding, where we feel safe by having stuff around us, and yet there's still a sense of unrest of learned helplessness in it, that we are actually drowning under physical stuff, or shrouding our bodies, making our bodies really big as a layer of protection, which we often see, and Kaiser Permanente, the Vincent and Faletti talk about this in the adverse childhood experiences, where it was actually a weight study class, the group that actually evolved into the ACEs, where they saw people doing really, really well losing weight, and then something would trigger them in their environment, and they would either put on more weight or they'd drop out of the program. And they found that it was because losing the extra weight, losing the clutter, losing the addiction, right, to perfectionism. There's always a layer of shame underneath there. So this is where the trauma gets stuck in our bodies, and where we want to really rewrite the story, reset the brain and the neural pathways in the nervous system to create safety for ourselves, right? I hope I'm making sense. I always kind of get into this and it goes off on a tangent. But yeah, so we want to look at the organ systems, and we really want to educate ourselves to how does my body work, so that I can start listening to my internal landscape, listening to the nudges, the God winks, the what I call the spidey senses of our brain, of our nervous system, of our body parts, that's actually telling us, hey, you need to look at something. And this is where you find the gift in the depression, in your anxiety, in the trauma, or whatever that is that you've experienced, and you start to heal, right? That's the spontaneous healing, when you can start to identify that your body never lies. So it's all stuck in the story. And then, of course, we want to look at the gut-brain, the HPA axis. So the gut brain, the second brain, the enteric brain, that is your intuitive trust, and you cannot create your life if you've shut down off the solar plexus, off your sexual chakra, because underneath the trauma there is this sense of shame or blame or regret or guilt and worry. We're addicted to worry. So the addictions to perfectionism, the addictions to keep showing up and be enough in order to be acknowledged, it has to start by acknowledging your body parts, that they all play a vital role in keeping you alive. And the beautiful thing is that your animal never leaves you. You leave your body. You leave your animal body by living in your head and trying to figure out a way from a cognitive point of view, where actually it's very counterintuitive. Deep healing, that cellular level of healing, starts at the energy of the blueprint of you that came into this life knowing that you were perfect, knowing that you showing up as, one in a godzillion, that you happened, that those chromosomes split and joined and burst into this energy that is you having a physical experience. So we want to look at the parts of where you stop trusting yourself, where you stopped listening to your gut knowing. And the vagus nerve is how we get that information up to our head. So how do we strengthen the vagus nerve? How do we look at the part, that sloppy part of the ventral vagal nerve, that the dorsal part? It's a wandering nerve, so it's wandering everywhere, and it's communicating to all your organs, endocrines, and body parts, right? That's the communication highway. And we can go into that right down to the solitons and the quarks of the cells. But if you just start to look at it from a more simplistic view of the chakra system, of the meridian pathways, it's all about communication. And we have to change the dialogue. We have to change the internal dialogue of our stories by going into the shadow parts, the parts that we don't want to look at. We wouldn't exist without our shadow. Our shadow is proof that we exist, right? We're human bodies. And the gift is in the shadows. And when you start to look at the blind spots, the places where you're avoiding seeing what you think is a wrongness as a strongness, that's where the magic happens. And this is where we re-engage and we strengthen the vagus nerve by our social engagement. So it's about having community that supports you, having a place that's safe for you to go into your deepest, darkest fears and be seen and held in that place. It's about not trying to change it for somebody. It's about being witness as you are the observer of your own life and your own story, but getting the support that perhaps you didn't have as a child, to feel safe and expressing your fears and expressing your anxiety and expressing your anger. Anger is such a potent catalyst for moving us forward in our lives. And I remember my mom saying, and God bless her, I adore her and I love her, and she grew me into the woman that I am becoming today, because there's always more stuff. But she used to say to me, Sarah Jane, you can't be sad because you look angry. And as a child that only knows how to express and feel energy, what do you do if you're not allowed to be sad and you're not allowed to be angry because it makes other people uncomfortable? And this is where, as social beings, that social engagement of having people that support you, having people that can meet you where you're at without trying to impose their point of views, their projections. And I'm going to talk a lot about projections and how we use projection in our life because we're afraid, because we're not feeling safe, and how to change that so that it can be an honoring, nurturing place, not just for you, but for the people that are showing up in your life. So yeah, it's just like, would you be willing to have a full range of experiences through the emotional body and allow your body to shake off and come out of this freeze state, to really unthaw, to thaw out the parts of you that are locked up in pain, whether that's physical or emotional or mental pain, so that you can really start to live your life on purpose as the beautiful being that you came into the world to be, and go from there. Because when you shine, you give other people the invitation to start to shine too. And I always end with this, so I'll end it again because it is Soul Fueled Sunday. That remember that there's only one of you, and only you can share what you came here to share in your own unique way, with your own capacities and your own experiences, in the power of parables, right? Because this is how we've stayed connected in villages, in tribes, forever. The tribal truth was to be able to speak the story in a way that there was learning and growth and reconnection by whatever that looks like for you. It's the rite of passage. And the longer that you stay stuck in your story, the longer that you stay traumatized or numbed out or desensitized in the not enoughness, that I can't show up until something happens, the longer the people that are looking for you have to wait to receive what only you can give them. So the world isn't waiting for someone like you. The world's waiting for you and your precious gifts. So have a beautiful rest of your Sunday. It's still quiet in my house, so I might go and record another one of these. My battery's about to die. But let me know if this was meaningful, if this was valuable, if it turned on some more of your light for you by just hearing me rambling on. Those of you that know me know that I roll with the energy, totally uncensored and unmuted, and I do tend to go off on a tangents because I'm just kind of pulling in on the energy of those of you that have graced me with your presence, and I'm really grateful that you do that. It's so nice to see the same people, part of my tribe, show up. And Jana, Jocelyn, I honor you, I see you, and I thank you for being here and being on this journey with me. So let me know what's coming up for you. I might be doing a little animal medicine later on, specifically around showing up in your business. So if that's something that interests you and you'd like a little animal medicine today, post your comments and questions below, and I'll get to that later on. All right, guys, have a beautiful rest of your Sunday. Lots of love. Bye. Mwah.